Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Environmental Social Justice. Today, our special guest is Mr. Kirk Shickman. He is the Director of Extreme Heat Initiative with the Adrienne Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Center. Quite a mouthful. Thank you for coming to the show today, Kurt.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Wendy. It's really great to be here.
Thank you so much. So most people don't quite understand how important heat is and that it is the root cause of everything that we're dealing with. So could you just explain in a very simple manner why heat resilience is important? What's happening out there?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So when we really look at the issues that we face in urban systems and in human systems, rising temperatures and extreme heat, so both the day-to-day high temperatures in some places and then those spikes that we call heat waves, underlie a lot of the challenges that we face in our cities. Everything from your iPhone not working on a hot day to not being able to land airplanes on very hot days in certain cities, down to, just making certain health conditions worse, lower educational outcomes, crops failing, things like that. So if you could play a game of name a system that we rely on, and we can tell you how heat has a negative impact on that. And as we're seeing, temperatures are rising. Yes. The frequency of intense heat in places is rapidly increasing. So places like, for instance, Miami, that would have experienced maybe a week or two of temperatures over 95 degrees are now going to be looking at a future of months of that type of weather. So we have a real need to focus on the issue of how do we build resilience to heat, not only in our infrastructure, but actually critically, how do we build it in ourselves? And the good news is there's a lot we can do, both in our behavior and in our systems and our governance and policies to actually address that. But as you say, it's a silent and insidious disaster in many ways, because you don't see it physically often, although you do sometimes roads melt, but you often don't count the deaths that occur because of heat as heat deaths, and we certainly don't count all of the health challenges that come from heat, and tag those to the actual root cause, which is the heat itself. So there's a lot of awareness that needs to be raised, and that's a lot of what we're trying to do at I'll call it the Arsht-Rock Center, to shorten up the name a bit, but the Adrienne Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Center.
Thank you for shortening that. It is a lot to say at once. And just to let people know, when we talk about the root cause of heat, we're talking about if you're an outdoor worker, that heat will be devastating to you. You cannot work long hours outside, so that will affect the outcome of that job. Sea levels rising, a direct result of heat. So things will flood, you'll have storm surges, more violent storms. I know people that work in construction, and they will not put computer components in basements anymore because they know sea levels rising, and they're like, well, it's just going to get flooded in 20 years. We got to move that stuff to the second and third floors. That's how we now have to think about things. But when you talked about high heat and how we have to respond to it, I believe you guys are developing a way, two things, establishing heat officers in states, but also naming heat waves. That's critical.
We think so too. I mean, naming heat waves actually is a bigger piece of the work. There's more in that, and so I want to, maybe if I have a minute, just unpack that for a little bit. Of course. So to name something, there also needs to be categorized. So we don't want to name every hot day, or else we would run out of names in a month. So we don't want to do that. But really, at the root of what we're trying to do is go one or two steps beyond how we message and warn about heat now. Right now, when you get a warning from the National Weather Service, it's about the temperature or the temperature and the humidity, which are important. Those are the weather conditions that actually have those health impacts. Yeah. But what we find is that those are sometimes hard for folks to internalize. Yes. They're not immediately evocative of exactly how dangerous heat can be. And so what we're really trying to do is what is more generally called impact-based forecasting, which is to say, how do we go beyond the important weather forecasts we have and actually translate that into the expected health outcome that those weather conditions will have in a particular place. And so we've worked with a set of global experts as part of our Extreme Heat Resilience Alliance to develop a system that in each of the places it's deployed links the weather, the historical weather, with historical health outcomes to allow us to predict what it will look like going forward. That's the first step. The second step is then to say, well, can we then categorize those so that we understand there are some heat waves that are like Category 1 hurricanes. They're dangerous, but they're not terribly dangerous. We need to message certain communities, certain vulnerable populations to make sure they're doing what they need to do, but they're not maybe a huge issue for the broader population. And then you've got like what I would call your equivalent to your Category 5 hurricanes, the really dangerous ones that we all have to be focused on. We have to pull out all the stops with all the different people to deal with. So being able to categorize those heat waves carefully around those health outcomes is also a big part of what we're doing with our pilots in our pilot cities. And then we get into the naming piece, which is, when you say like Katrina or Ida, I don't have to add hurricane to that. And that translates to everybody, no matter where you are, overseas, here, they know what you're talking about. We don't have that for heat. And so for those really dangerous storms where we really need to make sure people understand, hey, this is something I need to react to. Like, I may not evacuate for a Category 1 hurricane. I might go to the grocery store and buy a few extra groceries, but I probably won't evacuate. But if I'm looking at a Category 5 hurricane, there's a whole different set of things on the table in your life, and for the authorities that are helping you prepare and respond, right? We need to have the same thing for heat. And so that name really gives you that extra sort of evocative oomph, if you will, to say, this is a big deal. You need to take this seriously. We need to do some things to prepare and get ready for what's coming. So that's really where the naming, the whole overarching sort of piece of the naming comes from for us.
And, a lot of people don't really take heat waves that seriously because we've had them for so long. They're like, yeah, it's just a heat wave. They're not realizing, tires on cars are melting in certain states. As you said, airlines cannot land or take off due to high heat because you need certain air pressures and temperatures to have liftoff. So this is actually catastrophically important in naming them, having heat officers. I believe Miami is the only state or city that has a heat officer right now, or are there others?
In the U.S., yes, but globally, there are chief heat officers in Athens, Greece, in Freetown, Sierra Leone. We just last week added a chief heat officer in Monterrey, Mexico, and we have one in Santiago in Chile. And we'll expect a couple others to be added. The idea here isn't within our center to blanket the earth with chief heat officers. But what it really is to demonstrate that this is a critical position, because heat is just, as you know, it's a real challenge to focus on heat because you can approach it from a lot of different directions. A lot of different agencies have to be involved. A lot of different parts of a community, the civil society, have to be involved to actually effectively address heat, not just respond to a heat wave, but actually to transform our urban space effectively to be resilient and to thrive in a warming world. And so this chief heat officer position really is the linking agent amongst them. They're the ones that create the plan. They get the right agencies and folks at the table to create that plan and execute it. So that's that we see that as a really key position. And so what we're really trying to do with our cohort of chief heat officers is to provide them the support they need to be successful in that role and to deliver on the plans that they've developed with their local partners, and to see that grow beyond what we're doing.
So ultimately, they are the chief liaison between all of these different silos of industry to have synergy amongst these industries so that we can all work together to try to have resilience. And what are some examples of resilience that we could do? Like maybe the average person could do to help out, or get involved in your organizations or city that you can help do this?
Sure. Well, let's start with the personal. I mean, I think the first thing is when you have a hot day, get in the shade, try to avoid hot places, drink more water. And you know what, in terms of behavior that will be beneficial to others as well, reach out to your neighbors, reach out to family during these days. You wouldn't believe how important it is to make these connections on hot days, because the difference between being okay in a heat wave and not can be a matter of minutes. And those conditions can change quick. So checking in on your family and friends and neighbors is really important. That's something that we can all do to sort of build our own social safety net around this. Yes. More broadly, when you have the opportunity, and if you have the opportunity as a homeowner or a business owner, look at your space. A white roof or a reflective roof or a wall, it doesn't just benefit your energy bill. It actually reduces the air temperature in the neighborhood around where you are, and it makes your building more passively survivable. So when you have, like with Ida, where we had a hurricane, knocked out power, and then a heat wave came after it, it makes that building more livable when the power's not on, even if you have air conditioning. So those are little things you can do. Planting and maintaining trees. If you look out your door and you see, a tree in the tree box that you didn't plant, maybe give it a little water, make sure it grows to be the tree it can be, and provide those ecosystem services. So there's a lot of little things we can do to engage on this issue. But those are sort of the basics that I would mention.
And I love that. And actually, we just painted our roof white, and let me tell you, it made a big difference because it was asphalt before, and we just had it coated with a silicone, nice and rubbery to keep the water out, and it worked great. I mean, we could immediately notice the difference. Going on to my favorite topic in the world, risk management, insurance. When you and I previously spoke, I told you a story how people in New York City were experiencing, the elderly were experiencing heat wave, and they were going to the hospital due to heat stroke. And someone said, hey, the insurance companies, what if you guys, instead of paying for hospital beds and treatment in hospitals, buy everybody an air conditioner? It's a few $100, keeps people cool. And they said, no, we don't do that. Took a couple years, but they finally bought air conditioners, and their bills went down because they were not covering people in hospitals. They just spent a few $100 on an AC. What else could people do, mainly in risk management, resilience, to offset the long-term damage that could happen with human health? Because there are certain demographics of people who are more susceptible than others.
Well, Wendy, I think you hit it on the head that the insurance industry broadly has a tremendous opportunity to be transformative in this space, both in the short term and the long term.
Yeah.
So I think, first of all, there are, I guess we would call it parametric insurance if you're, nerdy about it, but essentially insurance that triggers when you have certain events or certain, conditions, like certain weather certain temperatures or certain, levels of flooding or things like that trigger, an insurance payout. So that can go to support, people when they need it the most, access to funds to be able to survive a heat wave, buying more water, things like that. I mean, that's all possible. That can run through, perhaps through a company's benefits program. So you could actually provide those benefits to a company that has workers that are outdoors or in unconditioned spaces to allow them the flexibility to do the things they need to do to stay safe during hot conditions. There's opportunities for insurance to, at the municipal level even, where, when certain conditions occur, there can be prearranged financing that allows that city to react quickly and get the, response assets out where they need to be in advance of the conditions that we know are coming, days in advance. This can be critical in actually reducing the impact on the health system and both in mortality and people's interactions with, the emergency room. So I think, and then you can go beyond that into, more broader transformational, longer term things. But I think the bottom line is this industry has so much potential to be more than just a dry document that people interact with, in a way that they don't necessarily. It's something they do because they have to. It actually has to be much more than that in this space, and I think we're going to see that. And that's something that at Arsht-Rock we're working on with a set of insurance partners, and more broadly with what I'll call it the sort of finance industry, which involves both private, public, international development, and other types of funders, to really start to organize these different pieces and funding models and support models into a coherent capital stack, we'll call it, that can then fund projects and fund the type of support that cities need to address this challenge of heat resilience amongst their citizens. And to me, this is not just critical from a climate perspective. This is absolutely critical for those of us that actually care about an equitable future on our planet. Because heat is 100% an unnatural disaster. It's one of those things that if it's 90 degrees, I'm not going to be suffering. But 3 blocks away, someone who's experiencing those same temperatures could be in a very dangerous position. And a lot of that is not. A lot of that doesn't have to be that way. And so there's real opportunities for us to invest in not just our climate future, not just our resilient future, but actually an equitable future by doing the same thing around heat. So I think that's really important for folks to understand.
I mean, the social justice aspect is huge. If you think about, certain people who are exposed to chemicals from a young age are going to develop asthma as they get older, going to have certain medical conditions as they get older that they will carry through their life. So those high heat conditions will affect them differently than someone who was never exposed to that.
Absolutely.
And the people need to start making those connections. I always call it the chain reaction. Everything's connected. And we need to start thinking a little more broadly and say, just because I'm not directly affected doesn't mean it's not a problem. Everyone needs to start thinking collectively and together and trying to resolve this problem. And I love the fact you guys are working with the insurance industry because there's great potential there. It's not just about paying out claims.
100%. And I do want to point out, we've talked a lot about this as avoiding a negative. and that's certainly that's a benefit, right? Of course, that's
Yeah.
important. But actually, if you look at what cities are doing, and I can give you a great example from Freetown, Sierra Leone, this is actually an opportunity to create economic value and to help people thrive, and not just despite the climate, but because of it in some ways.
Yeah.
So in Freetown, for example, they've planted close to 1 million trees already to help reforest a city that's been deforested, to create shade, to create comfortable areas of respite. But they're doing it by employing local people to plant and maintain those trees. So you're creating economic value, not just a shade asset or an urban heat island mitigation asset. You're creating like an actual job that someone can do and make money and support a family. We've seen this with cool roofs and walls in other places around the world where you can create an entire supply chain of local workers that service this market and benefit their community. And so for me, it's great because we're reducing the urban heat island effect. We're reducing, we're improving the thermal comfort of a house, and they don't even have to worry about that. They're there. I've created a local job. I can stay in my community. I can support my family and my broader community with these jobs. So there's a lot here beyond just avoiding the negative. And I think that's an exciting piece of this for us as well.
And I love the fact you guys are focusing on the positive. I mean, there's so much negativity out there. That's why I do this webcast. I try to bring out the positive because there's way too much focus on the negative. So I do love the fact you guys are doing that. How can people get involved with your group? What can they do to help?
Well, I'm always available. I mean, I think this is something where, there's being a voice in your community is critical. We've talked about this as sort of a global issue, and it certainly is. But the reality of it is it's change at the local level. It's the champions that drive this in their communities that are really where this has to happen. So all us groups that are focused on national and regional and global, we need to have those local champions. They're the secret sauce. And so I would say if this lights your fire, get involved. Start talking to your local, representatives, your local community. Make this an issue. See your existing issues through the lens of heat. Some places that have issues with like childhood health or childhood asthma, heat is a big factor in that. Identify those lenses that you can work through, and we can then support you. We can work with you. We can amplify your voice, but it only works when there are people that are of a place in the local community that see it this way and can make that case. There's no amount of fact sheets that I can send somebody that's going to make a difference from when their neighbor is going to tell them something. So I would say ultimately that's really the critical piece. And when that's in place, we can do amazing things together. But it's really just, taking that action.
So you're saying that every little bit helps?
Did I walk into that tagline or what? Yes, that's what I'm saying. Exactly.
And I trademarked it. So thank you for your time. This has been extraordinarily helpful. I hope that people will start doing those small changes at home. Do the light roof, do the light walls, grow trees, water those trees that you may see struggling, and talk to your neighbors. I mean, that's where it's all going to start. That's where it's going to make the change. It's not going to be politicians. It's not going to be large corporations. It's going to be all of us working together. That's the only way we're going to get this done.
Hear, hear.
So thank you so much. We will see you guys next time. Have a wonderful day. Take care. Bye-bye.